thanks for, okay, so I guess we're on now, and thanks for joining us. The point of, sort of this conversation this time is in part, like, I feel like you've just been continuously ahead of the curve when building AI applications, and you've also basically lived through and transitioned through multiple, like, almost like paradigm shifts. And so it'd be just interesting, I think, for us to talk about like what it's like to make those transitions, and then sort of like the smart things you did and some of the mistakes, and then go from there. But as a bit of context, sort of you're Evan MacMillan, CEO and co-founder of Gridspace, AI voice agent that SRI that you worked with, you work with SRI, and you guys have been through sort of, I feel like, the thick and thin of understanding how to build these AI agents for the last, how many years has it been?
It's a long time. Yeah, over a decade. Before this chat, I was trying to remember when I first met you, James, and I think it was at Bloomberg's office on the Embarcadero. Siobhan had like dragged me into the office because she thought it was probably a good company, and then she brought you in to like double check, and it was you had a lot of questions for me back then, and I'm excited for your questions 10 years later.
That's right. And then I'm James Cham. I'm a VC with Bloomberg Beta, where we invest broadly in the future of work. And so that's the context. Okay, so let's do this. Let's see here. When did you realize that there was an architecture shift happening, right? Like you guys have been building these voice agents for a while, so you guys made a bunch of good decisions, things were working, and then like the ground before you shifts. When do you feel like you realized that?
It's a great question. So we entered the world of speech and language technology at the beginning of a really big shift, and it was a shift in where the work was getting done. So we had a collaboration with SRI, and it was pretty much the end of speech and language technology at SRI. Most of the really interesting research was moving out of labs and academic institutions and into companies where they had data, because the new models were being built by data scientists and machine learning folks as opposed to linguists. And we were at sort of the beginning of that first change. And I think from going back, maybe I didn't even realize it at the time, that was really helpful to be part of that change, because it's very humbling to see one institution pass the baton to another institution. And right. I think we went into this entire venture together knowing that there were going to be more baton passes over the years. So that was the first. It was, the entire work was taking place outside of labs. And then, LLMs is probably the one you were alluding to. Like, we can get into that one later.
Yeah. So when did you realize that was happening? I feel like you were earlier than most, right? Like seeing this. When did you realize this?
Yeah, look, I think we were, so maybe a little quick context on Gridspace. So Gridspace makes conversational AI. We make software to search and analyze all your phone calls, and software to train and deploy voice agents. And before we were in the voice agent arena, we were making software that observed and analyzed in real time billions of minutes of phone calls. So we were in this fortunate position of having already crossed a few important chasms, which was running machine learning models, modern machine learning models, on lots and lots of conversational speech audio in really high stakes environments. And that put us in a position where before people were even talking about these models, we were really interested in what would come next. I think to put a date on it, we started experimenting with LLM-like models. We had been building large language models for quite some time, but our first true LLM experiments were in 2021, and we knew we were going to need to become really, really good at that type of model to ship natural sounding voice agents.
And so how did you know it was important? I feel like, obviously you had you had an actual business going on, right? On the one hand, and on the other hand, you still have to be like poking on the edges of what's possible. How did you realize?
So I think one of the reasons why we knew LLMs would be important is because we knew that voice agents would be important. And one of our first most exciting demos, USA's one of our largest customers, and we were in San Antonio, and we brought out a very early version of Grace, which was at the time not running on LLMs, but sort of a precursor set of dialogue system models. But one of the cool things about that version of Grace was Grace's voice was trained on a real a real agent, a person, and we had used some new neural models to make the voice sound really, really, really good. And the reaction that we got, even though that virtual agent that we demoed that day took a very long time to build and was very rules based, the reaction we got from that initial sort of demonstration of the technology was so positive that we knew that we had to figure out that next set of innovations that would make it possible to make conversation with that agent more natural, and then also solve two more very important problems, which was actually onboarding people very quickly to these agents, and then validating that they achieve some specific outcome in production.
Right. And then when you go through and trying to figure out whether or not to adopt something like this, what's that process like? Right? What's up? Because obviously there's like dipping your toe in the water, and then there's some point where you have to make actual real big decisions. So tell me about that.
So I was thinking about this question, and we've seen it happen a few times where there is state of the art on some old model, and then there's early state of the art on some new model. And for some period of time, sometimes that time period is longer than other times, there's an overlap where state of the art on the old.
You mean in terms of performance?
Yeah, right? Performance, accuracy, accuracy, price per performance. You name your dimension. There's some overlap, and we saw that with automatic speech recognition as people were moving from these HMM DNN models to pure DNN models to true end-to-end systems. The performance, the word error rates of these systems were fairly compatible. But what was so interesting with those shifts in ASR, and then we saw it in dialogue systems, and then again in more of these compound models, was that there were clear advantages to making that next generation model work in production. And you look at all the different parts and the complexity of running a bespoke, back in the day, it was like a HMM model in production. It was like, there's no way you want to be doing that if you have the option to run an equally performant end-to-end model. So we saw the trade-offs, not just in terms of accuracy, but also in productionizing those models, for customers. And then there's two other components that I think AI ML researchers don't always consider, but are hugely important at this moment in the cycle, which is it's not just about the trade-offs with the model, but the trade-offs that come as a result of ease of enablement and ease of validating the applications these models power in production environments. So you look at the challenges that people are having right now in this general category. We can get some pretty cool capabilities to work with frontier models. Enablement, customer success, that's the new frontier. And it's the application companies that are actually grappling with those problems that are making those sort of right trade-offs at the model layer in order to solve the whole problem.
And when you sort of make this sort of architecture shift, tell us about some of the mistakes you made along the way.
So I guess, I don't know if it's a mistake, but I guess you always wish you were working on the right thing even earlier. And, so when you do make a good decision, you're like, I wish I made that good decision even earlier. So, LLMs was no different, but we moved very quickly. And unlike a lot of companies that were working on that particular architecture at the time, we already had a lot of production data and we could do stuff with it, particularly streaming speech data. So we were in a position to start to use those and get value from them very quickly. I think one thing that was maybe unclear still as we were making the move to LLMs was just how much customization we were going to be doing on a per customer basis. And what true unlock with LLM and these other, where we eventually landed is, a lot of the friction in rollout came from building extremely bespoke models for specific use cases and specific customers, and then having to operationalize those bespoke models in production. And as we matured, we were able to have pre-trained models that could serve lots and lots of customers at a time because they were very, very good. And we were making configuration changes as opposed to low-level AI, ML, machine learning architectural changes to their models. So that was a big learning for us, was getting to the point where we were turning configuration knobs as opposed to, building brand new models for every single person that we're with.
That makes a lot of sense. Now, there's also something organizational. Like, I feel like I'm just curious, like, when you think about how you've organized yourself from, like your previous company to this one to the next, to like the, post 2022 version of this, like, how have you changed how you organize the team?
So, that's a great question. So maybe I'll speak just to last year. So in the last year, one of the biggest changes to the team that we've made organizationally is the creation of a delivery team. And delivery was less important in the more R&D days of Gridspace, and has become incredibly important now, because what we're fundamentally doing is optimizing those last two big blocks of work for customers, which is making sure that they're enabled on our product and making sure that the outcomes that they get from the product align with their business needs. And I think that part has to be reflected in headcount and also in what the company talks about in values, because a lot of folks are thinking, it's like, oh, that new model, that new powerful model is going to have some capability that makes it possible for us to simplify delivery or simplify the process of measuring the outcome. And in some applications, that's absolutely true. And in no way would we ever bet against powerful models. But in many ways, as those powerful models become available to application layer companies, that ups the stakes in making sure delivery really, really works, and that the outcomes that are enabled by those more powerful models are understandable to the folks that ultimately pay for those applications.
And then between between product engineering, data, QA, right? It feels like has that mix been roughly the same?
So I think I'm curious what you think about this question, because what we've seen is, I can tell you one quick story. So we were working with a large customer, and they were in like the telecommunications space, and they had a situation where they were trying to figure out how to help some of their field workers diagnose problems with installations. And they had phone call traffic between the field workers and headquarters, and they wanted a model that could figure out what was wrong with the installation. And there was one day at Gridspace where Nico, Anthony, and I, co-founders of Gridspace, were sitting around the table, and it dawned on us that if God had access to all of these calls and all of this traffic, God could not figure out what was wrong with this particular installation. And it's funny to hear people talking about the God models today. And I think more people are going to be around the table and have that same conversation, where even if you have the God model, unless that God model, can somehow do something that no model has ever done before, which is things beyond what is in its data, we're going to be having that conversation again and again and again. And that really moved us even faster to build a delivery team and to understand what kinds of problems are best scoped for these kinds of agentic systems.
That's funny. I mean, I do think like there's a shift in the names of a bunch of roles that map roughly to, like what data are we collecting, what are you engineering and what are you testing, right? And it does strike me that like the balance of power between all those organizations shifts, right? In part because, as you said, like you are asking different questions than you might have asked 10 years ago around understanding systems. This is terrific. Okay, so let's hear. So for you now, looking ahead, what are like the open questions that you've got that you're trying to figure out?
So we are, we continue to innovate at all levels of the stack, and we are, like many folks, very excited about what new capabilities will be in these GPT-5 class models. So we're definitely interested in tracking those developments. We're also very interested in what will happen with some of these multimodal models that aren't necessarily completely trained on speech data, but can interact with folks in the voice channel. I think our view will be informed by what some of those capabilities are, once we start to see them. So I don't want to say like I have a hard, firm view on this yet, but our sense as a company right now is that these more powerful models will be fairly challenging to rein in and fine tune and align to specific tasks. And I think a lot of people talk about the expense of AI. And yes, like inference costs can be expensive with these frontier models, but I think a lot of folks are not calculating the cost to rein frontier models in to do specific tasks, and really not calculating the expense of ETL. So all the, plumbing around these models or multi-models, depending on the particular system, to get a particular job done. And, at our company right now, inference costs are not our biggest cloud SKU anymore. And that is a direct result of the fact that we have optimized inference over many years. And I talked to the CEOs of a lot of AI companies, some that are making developer APIs, some that are making agentic applications, some that are making very simple RAG applications, and their development, their inference costs are all falling, not just because of the fact that frontier model companies are lowering their token costs, but they're actually learning how to make their systems much more efficient. And I think for businesses that are looking to work on these types of applications internally, there's a decision that has to be made, which is like, are you going to be the ones that eke out all those optimizations, both cost, performance, user experience, or are you going to work with companies that just live and breathe optimizing those applications? And I think that will be a decision that folks will have to make across a variety of applications in their portfolios, because yes, you can make anything work, but at what cost? A good analogy would be like, you can make gold in a lab, but it will cost, millions and millions, if not billions of dollars. You might want to pay somebody, a few $100s an ounce to like mine it for you. That's really efficient and good at mining gold.
I feel like that's the right trade-off to be asking about, right? So, hopefully this gives a flavor of all the things that you've been working on over the last 10 years, especially the last 3, maybe especially the last year and a half. And so, thank you for the candor and the perspective, so it's going to be fun to see how you guys evolve going forward. And and indeed, it feels like this is a microcosm for a bunch of decisions that people are making right now everywhere. And so totally appreciate your time.
Yeah. Thanks, James. This was awesome. See you soon.
Always good to see you.